Hilchos Shcheinim Perek Sheni. So here the Rambam discusses the dinim of dividing chatzeres and how you divide chatzeres. Maybe a shtickle akdama. Weiss in Magid Mishnah that there was a difference in how they would make a chatzer in a kvar as opposed to a yoris. Now a chatzer means there's a number of batim, and around all the batim there was a chatzer. Now the question is, did they start with the chatzer and then they put the batim in the chatzer, or did they start with the batim and then they put the chatzer around the batim? So in the kvaris, what happened is that the area was like empty area, it was hefkerdik area. So they would go ahead, people would build houses, each person would build a house. And then after they all built their houses, they would build a chutzner around the house. That was the Seder. So when they built a house on an area that was like hefker, so therefore the Seder was that when you build a house, so Dalet Amos in front of your door also is yours. Because since when you bring things through your door, so you're going to have to unload things from your animal and to bring it into the door, you can't bring that behemoth into the house, so you would unload it in front of the door. So Memela, so 4 amas in front of the door is like bottle to the door. Now if you have a house with more than one door, so again, so 4 amas in front of each of those doors is bottle to that house. And Memela, later on when you're going to build a chutzner around all those houses, so it'll be ageret, that the house, the 4 amas in front of each door is a shaykhus to that house, even if a house has more than one door. So 4 amas in front of each door is shaykhus to that house, and then the rest of the chutzner is divided equally amongst the houses. That would be the seder when you have a chutzner in a kvar. Masha'inkin, a chutzner in the ear, so over there you would have to buy the karka. So first they would buy the karka. They would buy the karka, let's say if a number of people want to build houses in one chutzner, so they would buy the karka, and then they would create a chutzner, and then in that chutzner they would build houses. So and each house was allotted dalet amos. So even if Mashal one person builds his house with more than one door, but he doesn't get more than 4 amos for that house. In other words, he gets one door has the 4 amos. So the difference would be nachamal. If you have a chutzner and houses in the chutzner, so if we're dealing with chatzeris of the kvarim, so then each house would get for each door in the house dalet amos in front of the door. That would be his. Masha'inkin, if you're talking about chatzeris and ayoris, so over there you don't get dalet amos for each door. You only get dalet amos for each house. The Rambam doesn't spell out benegeh the chatzeris and the ayoris, but the Rambam says this din benegeh the chatzeris and the kvarim. This is what it says in Magid Mishnah. Perek Sheni. Chatzis HaKvarim, the Chatzeris which were in the Kvarim, as we said, that the Seder was that first they built the houses, and Memela, the Dalet Amos of each Pesach was bottled to the house, and Memela he was kind of the person that built the house, also received the Dalet Amos, and that was for each Pesach. Shekol Echad ve'echad bein alei bayis, each person builds himself a house. Even imtzas hachotzer shebein shnei abatim. So now you have the chotzer, which is shnei abatim, which you built later, is mishutef is l'chol bnei abatim. So first you had the houses, and then you have the chotzer around the houses, and that chotzer, which is around the houses, is equally owned by all the houses. Is harei yesh l'chol pesach u pesach arba amis lefanu berecha kol pesach. When he built the house, memela, so the 4 amas in front of each door became bottled to that house. So the person that owns the house has in this chotzer arba amas in front of each door berechav kol pesach, and v'hanisher me'ah pesach, and then what's left over him the pesach, and yesh be arba amas al arba amas l'chol shutav v'shutav chel kenese v'im lav ein chel kenese, because chol chotzer she'ein la'arba amas al arba amas eine kriya chotzer k'mei shebiyanu. So this thing you say that one which we learned before, that in order to divide something, or for one person to month from the other to divide it, it has to be kedei chalukah. What would be kedei chalukah by a chotzer? That each person should end up with having arba amas. That's the kedei chalukah of a chotzer. But what does it mean he ends up having arba amas? So first he has the arba amas in front of his Pesach. That like kilo, an extension of his house. And that's not only in front of his Pesach mamish, but in front of any Pesach that he has in his house. If he has more than one Pesach, that would also be part of the extension of his house, and that would be bottled to his house before we talk about the chotzer. Then you have to look at all the houses and see how many doors there are in each house, and then you have to allot dalet amos according to the roichav of the Pesach for each house, and that's his private property. And then besides that, you take a look at the rest of the chutzner and you see whether there's dalet amas for each person that has a house in the chutzner, and if there is dalet amas for each person that has a house in the chutzner besides the dalet amas which you gave l'chol Pesach of the houses in the chutzner, so then that chutzner is considered a chutzner sheyesh b'kedei chalukah. Ketzad hoyu shnei shutfim lezeh shnei batim lezeh bayis achad. The one shutf has two houses, the other one is one house. Is zeh sheyesh shnei batim, so meidedin loy min hachotzer arba amis l'chol bayis or bayis al kol reichav haPesach. First you give him 4 amis next to the reichav haPesach, another next to the door, the width of the Pesach, 4 amis extending out of the house. Afilu hoyes amis, even if the width of the door is 10 amis wide, nevertheless he owns that area which is 10 amis wide, 4 amis going out of his house. And v'zeh sheyesh li bayis echad nesli arba amis bereichav pischei lifnei pischei, and the other one that has only one house, so you give him the 4 amas bereichav pischei according to the width of his door, 4 amas extending beyond his house. And v'hanisher min hachotzer, and whatever is left from the chotzer, im yesh b'shtei shmeina amas. If we're talking about there's 2 people that live in this house, in this chotzer. So if there's 8 amas, im yesh b'shmeina amas, kidei sheyeh lezar ba'amas al arba amas, ulezar ba'amas al arba amas. You have to have shmeina amas al arba amas, 8 amas by 4 amas. So mainly each one will have 4 amas by 4 amas. Chutz min hapsachim is also yesh badin chalukah, so have a din chalukah v'chelkin and yevchelik. Masha'enkin pachim is ein badin chalukah. So we're learning over here 2 dinim. The din which we learned before, that in order to divide a chutzner, it has to have dalet amis lezeh, dalet aleph lezeh. That's din number 1. But besides that, we're learning another din that lepel this dalet amis lezeh, dalet amis lezeh, after each one receives the amount that he's entitled to, which is an extension of his Pesach. So if he has a house, and let's say according to the width of the Pesach, extending 4 amas beyond out of his house, so that's his area. That's before we count the area of the chutzner that we're going to divide. That's his area. So if he has, according to the width of the door and extending dalet amas from that door outwards, so that's his area. Now that is the other person that, let's say, owns 2 houses, so he has 2 doors, so he has also, according to the reichav of each Pesach, extending out of the house, dalet amas. And then you look at the rest of the chutzner and you see whether there's dalet amas al dalet amas lezeh, and dalet amas al dalet amas lezeh. Now, before he spoke a case where you have one person that owns 2 houses, and each house has a Pesach. So each Pesach has dalet amas. Now, mikol ruchesav is yeshli arba amas l'chol ruach. So each ruach has arba amas. However, v'myichad Pesach, if he designated a Pesach, this is the Pesach that he actually uses, and he doesn't use the other Pesachim, so then enli al arba amas keneged pischi. Then he only has arba amas keneged that Pesach that he designated. So again, if you have 2 houses, so for sure you have keneged each Pesach. Masha'enkin, if you have 1 house and you have a door on each side, so then if they're not designated which specific door, you can use any of the doors, so then you get arba amas according to the width of each of the doors. That's before you start dividing the chutzner between the shutfim. Masha'enkin, if you designated a door, this is the door that you use, so then you only have dalet amas connected that door. Now, aksadra is an area which only has 3 walls, and 1 wall is completely open, and there's a roof on top. Now, the question is this aksadra like a full aksadra, and is it something which you could walk into with your behema, with the masa of the behema? Is einle arba amas. If it's so then you don't have arba amas. Why? Because the whole purpose of the arba amas is to unload outside the door. The whole purpose of the arba amas is to be able to unload outside the door and then be able to take the things back inside after you unload it outside. Masha'en kain, if you're able to unload inside, you don't have to really unload outside. That's an efshali likanus l'teichum masoy. You're able to go in there with your masa into the aksadra. The Rambam really doesn't speak about a behema. It could be it's your masa, your own masa. You're carrying your own masa. Is Eli Arbamas, Vim Lav is Yeshbe Arbamas. So then you do have Arbamas. Shali Omru Sheyesh L'chol Pesach Arbamas. The whole purpose of the Arbamas that a person has in front of the Pesach is ela lifrik shamasoi, to unload his masa. So if you're able to, in other words, since it's such an open area, in other words, the whole wall is open, you're able to walk in there with your masa, so you don't really need dalet amas in front of the aksadra, so therefore you don't get it. Masha'inkin, if you're not really capable of bringing your masa into this aksadra and unloading in the aksadra, so just like every time there's a door, you have dalet amas in front of the door, so over here also you have dalet amas in front of the aksadra. Halacha Dalet. Beis Shar is like a small entrance hall, like that you're going into a house. Instead of going directly into the house, you have like a little room in front of the house that you go into the house through. That's a Beis Shar. A merpeses would be a porch, which you would go up a staircase, and then you would be a porch, and then from the porch you would go into the house, into the upper floor. And sometimes in the upper floor, there could be a number of rooms. So you're going up to a number of rooms. So the din is Beis Shar. In other words, right before, in front of the Beis Shar, a merpeses, or going into the merpeses, is also Yeshlam Arba Amas. It's the same idea. In other words, the purpose of the Arba Amas is to unload over there. So just like you would unload, if you'd have a door going directly into the house, so you have Arba Amas in the Chotzer right in front of the door to be able to unload before you go into the house. So here also, before you go into the Beis Shar, which will lead you into the house, so you also need an area to unload. And that's the dalet amas, which is in front of the Beis Shar. In the same way, when you're going up to the merpeses, you're going up on this staircase to go up to the upper floor, and you have like a porch going into the upper floor. So again, before you go up to this merpeses, so you have dalet amas to be able to go up to this merpeses and be able to go into the rooms on top of the upper floor. Now, hoya chamisha batim. You have a merpeses, an upper porch, and that you have 4 or 5, let's say, rooms going out to the merpeses. But the merpeses goes down the chotzer. There's a staircase going down to the chotzer. Because bepashtus, in other words, you don't have a separate arba amas for each one of those doors. You have the arba amas outside the merpeses in order to be able to go to merpeses. So all the people that go up on this merpeses to all the various different rooms on the merpeses, they're all going to use those same dalet amas, which is right outside the merpeses, to go up to the merpeses. Halacha hey, lul shel tarnagelim, a chicken coop, ein le arba amas, again, because you don't have to unload before you go into the chicken coop. Whereas you unload, you put the chickens into the chicken coop. You don't have to unload. You don't need 4 amas before the lul shel tarnagelim to unload and then start putting things into the lul shel tarnagelim. Halacha vav bayis, which is chetzi mekuri v'chetzi sheini kuri. You have a house, which half of the house has a roof and half of it doesn't have a roof. Ben shikiruya klap yifnim, ben shikiruya klap yichutz. Whether the roof is on the inner part of the house or the roof is on the outside part of the house, in other words, the part of the house that's immediately next to the entrance, is either way ein le arba amas, because lepel, since there's a part of the house that doesn't have a roof, so maybe you could go into the house, into the part that doesn't have a roof, and there do the unloading. Because whatever unloading you have to do, you could do it in that part of the house that doesn't have a roof, and therefore there's no need to have the dalet amas before you go into the house. Halacha zayin. If you have a house that's closed, there's no real open door. There's a door, the door is already closed. Is nevertheless yeshli arba amas, even though it's closed up and it's not really used at this point in time. But lepel yesh be arba amas, because lepel, since it is a door, so even though the door is right now closed up, nevertheless it's closed up. In other words, it's not a used door. But nevertheless, since it's a bias and lepel, it still has a door, so therefore it still retains the dalet amas which is entitled to the house. However, paretz is psimov. In other words, it's not only that the door is closed up, in other words, it's not locked up, but rather you completely took away the frame of the door. Paretz is psimov means you took away like the mezuzah and the mashkiv of the door, and you closed it up, so it's not really even nicker that there was a door there. Paretz is psimov, so then ein li arba amas, so then it has no arba amas. The whole purpose of the arba amas is before you go into the door, you should have arba amas, but now there's no longer a door. So if there is a door, even the door is closed up, still you'll pay had a right to the arba amas. You'll open the door. Masha'inkan once you apart it says psimov, so there's no door there. It's as if there was never a door there. Memela, so you don't have any arba amas anymore. Halacha ches. Bayis she'ein be arba amas al arba amas. The reason the house mechatchila doesn't have arba amas al arba amas, only arba amas b'chotzer. That doesn't have a din of a bayis, and therefore it's not entitled to arba amas b'chotzer. B'chalal, a din of a bayis is only if a bayis is arba amas al arba amas. Ella im yesh b'chotzer arba amas lezer v'arba amas lezer. At Pesach Habayis Hazeh Chilkin, if you're declaring whether or not you could divide this chutzner, so you don't think about how much the bias. Before we said you take into consideration what the bias is entitled to of the chutzner, and then the rest of the chutzner you divide $. Masha'enkin, if the bias has no arba amis al arba amis, so then you don't take into consideration the arba amis which is shaykhs to the bias. All you do is take consideration whether or not in the chutzner there's arba amis lazeh, arba amis lazeh, and that goes at Pesach Habayis. Now, if there's im yesh b'chotzer arba amis lazeh v'arba lazeh at Pesach Habayis hazeh, without taking into consideration anything about the Dalet Amos which is in front of the Pesach Habayis, because there's no Dalet Amos in front of Pesach Habayis. There's no din of Dalet Amos in front of Pesach Habayis. So then it's chilkin. That's din number one. Then the Rambam continues, v'hazevel shel chotzer, the zevel of the chotzer is mischalik lefi apsochim. Now the zevel of the chotzer pasha is being used for fertilizer. We're talking about like waste products of which comes into the chotzer. So the pashtus would be that it goes according to how many people are there. In other words, the people that the waste product which has a value. We're talking about a value as a fertilizer. So lepel, the waste goes out through the psachim. So that's what Rashi explains in the Gemara, that the waste goes out through the psachim. So there's a psameiri that says that when the waste goes out, so the waste goes out in different areas, so that waste becomes it accumulates more waste. It accumulates more waste. I don't really understand the Havanas Advarim. It accumulates more waste. So Mela, since it's coming out from different psachim, so Mela, let's say if a person has 2 psachim to his house, so he throws out waste from 2 psachim. The other person has 1 Pesach in his house, so he's throwing waste out of 1 Pesach. So he's like putting it in 1 area in the chutzner, and he's putting it in 2 areas in the chutzner. So Lepel, since he has it in 2 areas of the chutzner, so that weight accumulates, and therefore he gets 2/3 of the waste. Mashenk and the other person that only has 1 door, so he only gets 1/3 of the waste. Agam l'chura, the pashtus is, the amount of waste is according to how many people there are, not according to how many doors there are. But that's what it says. That's this halacha. That hazev shel chotzer is mischalik lefi apsochim, is divided according to the doors that the houses have. So again, as we're saying at Seir, you have one person has 2 doors to his house, and the other one has 1 door to his house, and then there's waste, and you gather all the waste together, so he receives 2/3 of the waste, and he receives 1/3 of the waste. Aval achsanya shel melech, but the achsanya shel melech, in other words, when the melech comes along, and he insists that the people have to host his soldiers. The question is, how do you host them? So that's lefi bnei Adam. Now the word lefi bnei Adam sounds like how many people there are, but lepel, the Ramah brings from the Shev Yankiv, and also based on the Meiri and Baba Basra, that it says that lefi bnei Adam doesn't really mean how many people there are but it means how many balabatim there are. In other words, we're not talking about how many people live in the house. How many people live in the house. In other words, each balabas, each household, we'll say each household has to host these soldiers equally. So if you have, let's say, a number of households, so we don't count how many doors the houses have. That's we also don't count how many people live in each house. We count only how many households there are. And let's say if there's, 10 households, and each household has a different amount of people, a different amount of doors, and there's 100 soldiers, so each household has to go ahead and feed 10 of the soldiers. That would be the pshat. Achsanya shel melech lefni bnei Adam, according to the people meaning according to the households. Halacha tes. Hashutfin shirotzu lachlik davar she'ein b'din chalukah. Whereas we said that you can't insist, one shutav can insist to the other shutav to say that he wants to divide it if it's a davar she'ein b'chalukah. But if they agree to divide davar she'ein b'chalukah, is aval pi she'ein mafsidin shmei, even though right now it's no longer going to be what it was originally. It doesn't have that same name. That was the gather of ein b'din chalukah. So it's chelkin. So normally it's chelkin. The pashtos, if they agree to do it, why shouldn't they be chelkin? However, it's like Hagdama, however, if you have shutfim that own kisvi HaKedesh, is aval pi she'rotzu leyachliku. So in other words, if you have, let's say, a krach of kisvi HaKedesh, let's say a krach of all of Tanakh, and now the shutfim want to divide, so one person will take Teirah, the other will take Nevi, and the other will take Suvim, so that's not a derech, that's not a covet. It's brought down that even though be'emes, if a person himself owns a Tanakh, he could divide. he's allowed to divide the Torah and the Nevi'im and the Ksuvim. But to go ahead and Shutfim, Shutfim should divide it, and the one Shutfim is taking Torah, the other one is taking Nevi'im, that's not a Derech Eretz. So notice, the not Derech Eretz is not just the Etzim dividing. The Etzim dividing, Al Pidin, you're allowed to do it. And also, would be, you could do it, you're allowed to do it. However, if you're dividing it, notice that's like a bizoyin to the Kisvi HaKedesh that is being divided in such a division, and therefore you're not allowed to. The Kisvi HaKedesh, Aval Pishirotzu Le'ach Leiku, because it's not a Derech Eretz for Kisvi HaKedesh for it to be divided in the division of Shutfim. B'med Dvarim Amurim, that it's not Derech Eretz B'krach Echad, if it's all B'krach Echad. Aval B'shtei Kriches, if you have two Kriches, in other words, there's two separate Kriches, so then it's Chilk, and then you could divide it. In other words, if they agree to divide it, they divide it. And it's brought down that, in other words, if one person, if the Shtei Kriches are different Kriches, so then obviously they have to agree. In other words, this is Torah and this is Nevi'im, and there's one Krach of Torah and one Krach of Nevi'im, so they have to agree to divide that he's going to take Torah and he's going to take Nevi'im, if they weren't connected. But if they're the same, in other words, they're both Torah and one is Torah, one is Torah, so you don't really need such a. Each one could say, "Listen, I insist that I'm taking my one." And Mamela, you don't need that they should agree. You don't need that they should agree. That's l'chatchila yesh b'kedei chalukah. Whereas over here, we're talking about that whether you're allowed to do it when they agree. We're not talking about but not agreeing. But if they're mamish the same, so then you don't have to come out to agree. If there's two sefer Torahs and one wants one sefer Torah, he says, "I'll take one sefer Torah." So then you have to make up. They're both of equal value, I suppose. Halacha Yud. Mokim she'ein beidin chaluka sheratzu shutfin lechalke. You have a mokim she'ein beidin chaluka. There's no you cannot force anyone to mechalik it because there's no kedei lazeh, kedei lazeh. Let's say a chotzer which doesn't have kedei arba amis lazeh, kedei arba amis lazeh is aval pi shekonu miyodam. There was a Maisa Kinyan. They committed themselves to divide it. And a person made a Maisa Kinyan to divide it. Nevertheless, kol echad mem yochel lachzer bei. Each one could have charata from this kinyan that they made to divide it, because shezeh kinyan dvarmu. That's called a kinyan dvarim k'mesha b'yarnu. A kinyan dvarim, a kinyan could only work if I'm being makna azach. Masha'enkin, I'm being makna something which is not a thing. That I'm going to do this. That's not called. That's called a kinyan dvarim. Memela, that's not koina. Aval im konim miyodim shezeh rotze b'roch pleini. V'zer rotze b'roch pleini is then einam yichilin lazbrim. If they made a ma'isa kinyan that we're going to divide it, and this one is going to get this chelik, and this one is going to get this chelik. So over here already, he's not only making a kinyan to divide. The pastors, he's making a kinyan that he's going to be koine his chelik. Whereas they're making a ma'isa kinyan with him that is being makna this chelik. This chelik is going to the other person. And al derezeh they make there's Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven is going to take the tzad mizrach, and Shimon is going to take the tzad ma'ariv. So they make a kinyan with Reuven that Reuven is giving Shimon the tzad ma'ariv. And they're making a kinyan with Shimon that Shimon is giving Reuven the tzad mizrach. So Mela Reuven is being koine the tzad mizrach, he's being koine the tzad mizrach, and Shimon is being koine the tzad ma'ariv. So that's mamash a kinyan. V'chein im holach zeh ba'atzmei v'hirzi b'chalkei v'zeh ba'atzmei v'hirzi b'chalkei is afal pishalei konim yodim, even though there was no ma'isa kinyan, is ein ochad mehem yochel lachzer b'chaveri. So once each one went ahead and hirzik b'chalkei made a chazaka b'chalkei, so then that's also any echem yochel lachzer b'chalkei. There's a deal on what's the chidush? Each one made a chazaka. So it's brought down that the pshat is that even though normally when a person wants to be makna something, so it's not enough that one person, he says, I want to be makna to you, and you could be koinet, and the person goes ahead and is koinet. In order for that person to make a kinyan chazaka, the other person has to tell him, lech hazeku kni, or he has to make a chazaka b'fanav. Over here, when two people are shutfim, and now they made up that they're going to divide it, and each one of the shutfim went ahead, and he made a chazaka in his chelik without the other one telling him lech hazeku kni, or without being lefon of the other person. Nevertheless, it's considered a ma'isa kinyan. There's an issue whether you're actually in a real ma'isa kinyan, or a chalukah is made even without a real ma'isa kinyan. That's a diun about it. Lashon Rambam is v'cheinem holach zeh ba'atzmei v'hirzik b'chalkei. Pasha hirzik is a ma'isa kinyan, a ma'isa chazaka. V'zeh ba'atzmei v'hirzik b'kele. Even though there was no ma'isa kinyan of a chlipin, but there was a ma'isa kinyan of hirzik. Is ein echad mem yochel la'azer b'chaveri. Halacha Yud Aleph. Ha'achim shecholku. Brothers divided, and v'asu b'neim girl. And they made a girdle amongst themselves. In other words, they divided, let's say there's a number of brothers, let's say 3 brothers, and then they divided 3 parcels of land. And now the question is which parcel which each one get. So it's Api HaGeirul. So one of the students is Api HaGeirul, and each person is going to take his part of the girdle. They put the 3 parcels of land on a piece of paper. They wrote a piece of paper, parcel 1, parcel 2, parcel 3. And now one of the brothers goes and takes out one of the pieces of paper. Is Kivin Sha'ala Girdle Le'echad Mem. Once one of the brothers got one of those pieces of paper, he got the girdle. Is Kanu Kulam. So he was kaina in his chelik, the Sachidush over here, that the girdle itself is kaina. The Maisa girdle, even though the that's not a normal Maisa Kinyan, but the Maisa girdle is kaina, makes the chalukah, and also causes that the other ones also are kaina their girdle, are also kaina their girdle. Now the question is, if there's 3 brothers, so L'chura, the Hitaka got his chelik, but the other 2 brothers are still mu'uriv. How does it work as far as the 2 brothers are concerned? There's a machlekas. But again, whether or not the 2 brothers now can have charata and say, listen, he Taka has his chelik, but now we have to deal with it ourselves. Or no, since we already made one chalukah, one person took out his, so it's pasha that the other ones can each one take theirs, and they can't argue about it anymore. It's already a done deal. That's the pasha lashon Rambam. And those ha'achim shechol kavasa b'neim gedel kivel sha'ar gedel echad mem is kana kulam. Each one is going to be kind his girdle. In other words, they can't be chayzer anymore from this din of the girdle. Because b'hanoah shenasis lem sheshama mem zemizeh the davar sheiskim all of the fact that each one received hanoah. Knows what did each one get to be makna their chelik to this person that received the girdle. In other words, they all owned it together. Now this person made the girdle. So we say the fact that they had hanoah, that what they made up was actually actualized. So memela, that in itself is a gemiras das, that this person that got the girdle should get it, and once the one that got the girdle gets it, so in turn they also get it. You have to understand how, if they get it as individuals or they get it collectively. You know, if there's more than one left, so do they have to deal with each other again, or no? Once one person was zeicha, so the other ones could also each one be zeicha. It's a deal about it. Okay, let's read it again. Allah. Ha'achin shecholku v'asa b'neim geidel, and they made a geidel. Is kivin she'Allah geidel le'echad. Once one of them picked his geidel, is kanu kulam. So they were all kaina. So in other words, he was for sure kaina, but they're also kaina. They're also kaina their geidel. B'hanoya shenasilem shesham mizeh mizeh the davar she'skimu olav. The fact that they were maskim to make a girdle and lapel, they made a girdle, is gomer kolecha the makna lechaveri. He was makna lechaveri, and memela the pashas haloshen is that now each person could go ahead and pick his girdle and take his girdle. And there's no more pulling back to this girdle. They made up the girdle. One of them made the girdle already, and now the other ones could go ahead and each one could pull out his girdle and be kain. Halacha yud beis ha'achin shecholku harei hein kelekuchi zemizeh. And therefore, there's an issue when ha'achim shecholku, you could have, if you hold yesh breira, so it comes out that it's not pshat, one is buying from the other. Whereas the father owned, let's say you have a father and 2 brothers. So the father owned a large field, and now he has 2 sons. He has 2 sons, and 2 sons yashned. So you could say that each son is yashning his Yerush of the father. Whereas he's getting what he's Yerush from the father. So there were 2 brothers, but each brother who say Yesh Breda, the Breda is saying that he received he was entitled to the father. So he's getting it directly from the father. That's one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding is that Lepel, both brothers are koiner together, and now when each brother takes it, it's kilu, he's being koiner from the other brother. He's being koiner. The brother has a schus in this karka, and he's being koined from the other brother. That's the question. Is Reuven getting it from his father, or Reuven is getting it from Shimon? Reuven and Shimon are the sons of Yankov. Yankov died, and now he left a field, a large field. So is Reuven getting his field directly from Yankov, and Shimon getting directly from Yankov? Or no, Reuven is getting his field from Shimon, and Shimon is getting his field from Reuven. Now, L'may nafkaminas, so there's different nafkaminas, but one of the things over here is, we learned before, that when a person is moicher, so kol ha-mecher ba'ayin yofa mecher. So if l'moshel, someone owns a field, he owns a field, and now he sells part of that field to someone else. So since he sold that field to someone else, so we learned before, So even though he retained some of the field for himself, but Lepel, he doesn't have an, even though originally when he owned the field, he was able to have access to his field. He has field Aleph and the other one is field B, base. So now, in order to get to Aleph, he has to go through base. Now Lepel, he sold base. So he sold base, but he was left with Aleph. Now the question is, does he need from base permission to go to Aleph? So that we learned before that Kol HaMecher B'ayin Yafa Mecher. So when he sells the base, he sells the base completely. Just like we had before when he sells a house and he retains certain things in the house. So even though he retains certain things in the house, but for him to get to that ber or to that dus or whatever, so he has permission, or he has to buy it off from the person that he sold the house to. Because Kol HaMecher B'ayin Yafa Mecher, so Mela, the whole house became the buyer's. And now, if he wants to go to the item which is his, he has to get reshus from the buyer. Over here also, he had a field, Aleph and Beis, and now he went ahead and sold Beis to Shimon. So now, but he has to get to Aleph, so he has to go ahead and take reshus from Shimon in order to be able to get to his chelik. That's the musig of he needs to buy a derech from Shimon to get to his chelik, or Shimon needs to buy a chelik from Reuven to get to his chelik. Now, if Reuven and Shimon wouldn't have been lekuches, they would have been directly from the father. So then this thing wouldn't have existed, because Lepel, Reuven never gave anything to Shimon, Shimon never gave anything to Reuven, and they were kind of from their father, and they were kind of from the father as their father had it. So their father had it in a way that there was a derech. The father had a derech to go from Reuven's field to Shimon's field, from Shimon's field to Reuven's field. And that's what they were yarshent. So Memela, they wouldn't have had the problem. The only reason why there's this issue of having to be koina derech zelazeh is only because they're lekuch. Nachamol. Halacha yud beis. Ha'achin shecholku, achin that divided amongst each other, harein kelekuch zemizah. Which means each brother sold the other part to the other brother. And therefore, ve'ein lam derech zelazeh. So he doesn't have a derech. In other words, since he sold this, Reuven sold Sada Beis to Shimon, so therefore he can't go buy Sada Beis to get to his Sada Aleph. That's the number one. And also, if I want to use your property to be able to climb up a ladder and to be able to get to my property, I also can't. Because Lepel, since I gave you that property, so even though originally the person, I have a house on my property, and you have the property next to my house. And for me to get to the roof of my house, I have to put a ladder on your property to get up to the roof of my house. So originally, that was what the father did. The father obviously used the whole property was his. But now that they sold it to each other, so to speak, so Mela, the person that right now acquired this property, acquired it completely, and the person that was left with the house doesn't have a right to use the property to get up to his house. That's v'lei sulmi zelzeh. And also v'lei chalena zelzeh. V'lei chalenas means normally, if I have a window, so you have no right, you're my next door neighbor, to go ahead and build a house next to my window and be able to block my light. Because I have a schus to be able to get light from that side of the house. Mashengen, if I own a piece of property and now I sell the lot next to my piece of property, so when I sell my lot next to my piece of property, I sell it completely. Kol HaMecher B'ayin Yafa Mecher. So Mela, I have no schusim in that piece of property. So now you could go ahead in that piece of property and build a house next to my window. So over here also, since the brother got this piece of property, kilo from the other brother, so Mela, the brother that has the house with the window, can't tie against the brother that has the property. He shouldn't build a house over there. He shouldn't build a house over there and block the property. And also, if there's a channel of water and that's going through your property and coming to my property, and you say, no, I don't want. Now it's your property. So originally it was the father's property. It was the channel of water went through all of his property. But now the one has the property, and the other one has the other half of the property. So the one that the channel of water is going through his property, he says, I don't want the channel of water to go through my property to your property. I want to stop it. And Mamela, I can't have a taina. What's my taina? My taina is no. I mean, that was the way the property was sold. So I say no, because kol ha-mecher b'ayin yafa mecher. So therefore, I have no rights. I lose any rights to that property that I gave you. That property that you got, it's kilo, you bought it from me. And since it's kilo, you bought it from me. So therefore, the seller has no rights. That's kol ha-mecher b'ayin yafa mecher. That's v'lei amas hamayim zelzeh shekivin shecholku. That's the din. Kivin shecholku. Once they divide, leinisha leechad mem schus b'chelik chaveri. None of them have a schus in the other chelik. That's part of this din of ha'achin shecholku is kolukuchas. Let's read it again. Ha'achin shecholku arin kolukuchas. Brothers that divide aren't. They don't have a din of Yorshim, which the Yarshim director of the father. Because if that would be the din, then this whole din wouldn't apply. But the pshat is kilu, each one sold his portion to the other. And therefore they lose any rights to that portion that the other brother had. In other words, each brother doesn't have any rights in the portion that the other brother received. So therefore they can't insist that I'm going to use your property to get to my property, and also I can't insist that I'm going to use your property to put a ladder to get up to my roof. And I can't insist that you can't build a something on your property to block my light. And I can't insist that the channel of water which is going through your property should continue going through your property to my property. Shekiv and Shecholka, once they divide, I have no rights to your chelik. This your chelik is completely your chelik, and I have no rights there. Lefichach, yeshleim lahachim. We can say to the brothers, when the soda taka belonged to one person, to your father, is hoyemava ba'amasamayim azes makom lamayim. At that point in time, the channel of water used to go from one place to the other. Aval ata shenas zechelki. Now that this is my place, it's my piece of land. Is yeshil hasur amasamayim yalai. I could stop the amasamayim from going. In other words, I don't want this amasamayim to go through my property to your property. V'chein. In other words, I have my property. I don't want your window overlooking my property. I don't want your window overlooking my property. So I want to close that window. I'm going to build a wall and close that window. There's a machlekes or Shcheinim whether or not I can insist that you close your window in order for you not to be able to look into my property, or just that I have the right to build a wall and memela close your window. In other words, if I have no intention of building a wall, but I just don't want you to have your window open, could I insist that you close your window in order for you not to be able to look into my property or not? It's not clear. The Lashon Haram v'chein seisem hachalein amashkev al chelke. He could close that chalein. It's a machlekes Shcheinim. I'll call upon him. Seisem hachalein amashkev al chelke. And also ubeina b'tzad hasulam. If this person wants to have a place to put a ladder there, he could build on the side of the ladder. Afal pishu mevatlo tashmishi. He's not letting him have this tashmish of putting the ladder up. He builds a wall over there. Mamela is not going to be able to have this use of putting a ladder there to be able to go up to his roof. That's this din. So the nukud of the din is that two people that divide a piece of property, and their brothers, Achin Shecholku, so they divide a piece of property, each one gives the other one a piece, so that piece becomes completely his, and the other brother has no rights in that piece, just like if he would have sold it to him. Now, who adin? This lavdafka by brothers. Who adin? Shcheinim shekanu sodem yachad. Two people bought a piece of property from one person, and then v'cholko, and then they divided that piece of property. Is leinisha le'echad mem schus b'chelik chavera. Neither of them have a schus in the other chelik, and therefore mafsek amas hamayim mechelkem v'seisem achalenas. All these dinim that happen as a result of the fact that you have no rights in my property, and therefore I can do whatever I want in my property. You can't go ahead and mon to walk through my property, to have an amas hamayim going through my property, to stop me from being able to put a window, to put a wall over there, to insist that you want to have some rights in my property to be able to get to your roof. All of this doesn't exist because Lepel, you sold me this piece of property, and therefore you lost any rights in that piece of property. That's talking about when two people buy a piece of property together and then they divide it. So it's kili, each one is buying off the other piece of property from each other. You have two people that each one owns a piece of property. And then you have another two people that each one buys from one of those two people. You have Reuven and Shimon own properties next to each other, and now Levi went ahead and bought from Reuven, and Yehuda went ahead and bought from Shimon. So Memela, they're not people that divided amongst each other, they bought it from each other. So each one has the rights of whatever Reuven and Shimon had. And since Reuven and Shimon had whatever agreement, whatever dinim they had on each other originally, so those same dinim apply to Levi and Yehuda. Two people that bought a field from two separate people, from two separate brothers. Whereas whatever the sellers had rights, there was an Amas Hamayim that was going from one field to the other, and that was the rights, that was the Uzgestelt of the way it was. So there was Reuven and Shimon had a field, and Reuven had there was an Amas Hamayim going through Shimon's field into Reuven's field, and there was a window that Reuven had overlooking Shimon's field or Shimon's chotzer. So that was the matzav. And now comes along Levi, and Levi buys Reuven's property, and then comes along Yehuda, and he buys Shimon's property. So the din is the same din that there was by Reuven and Shimon, just like Reuven, Shimon couldn't have stopped that Amos Hamayim because that was the Seder, and that was the way it was. So Reuven Vaisus had a schus in that Amos Hamayim going through Shimon's field, and Reuven had a schus in that chalein that was overlooking Shimon's chaser. So that same schus is bought by whoever bought Reuven's property. Whoever buys Reuven's property buys Reuven's property with all the schusim, and whoever buys Shimon's property buys it also with all the schusim or with all the obligations. In other words, all the not schusim. Everything goes together. In other words, since they're buying it from the original people that own this, there's no issue. Masha'inkin, over here we're talking about when they bought it together as one. They bought a piece of property together as one, and then they divided it amongst each other. So when they divided amongst each other, so the division is kilo like a mechira, and memela is kilo. I sold you my property. When I sold you my property, I forfeit any schus that I have in that property. Halacha Yudalit. Chatzar hashutfim sheyesh ba din chaluka, oy shechalku b'rtzeinam afal pishein ba din chaluka. So you go ahead and you divide a piece of property. You have you're dividing a chotzer. You have a chotzer. Again, a chotzer is a place which surrounds the houses. And in those chotzer, they used to do things. They would do laundry in the chotzer. There would be all kinds of different things that there would be a shtamshus in the chotzer. So now, a chatzar hashutfim sheyesh b'din chaluka. Either we're talking about that it has a din chaluka. So one of the shutfim could insist that he wants to make a chaluka. It didn't have a din chaluka, but one of them insisted that he wants to make a chaluka. So the din is yesh l'cholechad mem lokav es chaveri livnis hakoisel be'emtza. So now this is a new din that they could insist. One of them could insist on the other that I want to have a wall. It's not enough that we're dividing it. I want there should be a wall separating us. Why? Like we said before, a chotzer is a place where people use for all kinds of things which are personal. And memela, he doesn't want that the other person should be watching him while he's using his chelik in the chotzer. Shehezik ria heziku knows the fact that that person is looking at him is considered a hezik. And ve'en le chazaka b'chotzer. And even if you had a matzef that says v'aval pi sha'amdu kach shanim rabis b'lei mechitza, because you had the chotzer that they were using it together, or even the chotzer was divided already, and now people are using it. Each person is using one side, but there was no mechitza. And now one of them comes along and says, "I want a mechitza." So l'churi ketaina, listen, there was already a muchzik. There was a muchzik. We don't need a mechitza. You were meichel already the mechitza. So the din is no. Aval pi sha'amdu kach shanim rabis b'lei mechitza. Is kefeu lasis mechitza b'chol sheyirtze. He could force him to make a mechitza b'chol sheyirtze. This is something which you could insist on, that you want a mechitza. So that's the din number one, that a person that's living in a chotzer, and this chotzer either was divided because it was a yesh b'chdei chalukah, or it was divided even if it was ein b'chdei chalukah, but they agreed to be mechalik it. Now there's two sides to it, and now one of them is coming along and saying, "I want a mechitza." So he could insist on a mechitza. In other words, you could insist originally, say, I want to divide the chotzer and have a mechitza. That could be the original taina. I want to divide the chotzer and have a mechitza. Or you could have a mitzvah. Originally they wanted to divide the mechitza, and now either they had to agree or they didn't have to agree, but lepel they divided the chotzer. Now one of them could that I want a mechitza. Now, reichiv became, when you make a mechitza, so obviously it takes up space. So reichiv became a kesel mishal shneim. Both of them have to contribute toward the place of the wall. The kama yerachbe, how thick does the wall have to be? How thick does the wall have to be? Is hakel kiminig medina, depending on the minig medina. Afilu nagu lasis mechitza b'neim bekana b'behutzim. If this is a place where it's a regular thing to make a mechitza with just beams, sticks and mats, with like haravis, it's a very, very flimsy type of mechitza, that's also fine. Because he's insisting that he wants a mechitza, and together the mechitza is a place that will prevent anyone from being able to look from one side of the chutzah to the other side of the chutzah. He wants to have privacy, so he could insist on having such a mechitza. So he can insist on having a mechitza which will give him privacy. The strength of the mechitza, that depends on the minig hamakim, what's normal to make a mechitza in a chutzah. Now, kama goyvel koisel, how tall does the koisel have to be? We're talking about how much could you insist. It's not psachiv to have a mechitza. The pshat is a person has a right to insist that he wants a mechitza. Now, what kind of mechitza does he have a right to insist? He has a right to insist to have a mechitza k'minig hamakim. Now, if the minig hamakim is to have just kanim v'hutzim, so that's what he can insist on. But he could insist on having a mechitza which shouldn't be see-through. You shouldn't be able to see through the mechitza. How high could he insist on having a mechitza? He could insist on having a mechitza which is 4 amas tall. Kama geva kesel ein pachas me'arba amas. That's the din of a chutzah. Now, v'chein begina in a garden. When in a garden, people don't really use that way like they use in a chutzah. But on the other end, people would like to have a certain level of privacy, that there should be like a separation between one gina and the other gina. V'chein begina kifeu lahavdil ginosim ginas chaveri. You could also force the other person to divide your garden from the other person's garden, and that would be b'mechitza gvei asar tvachim, not arba amis, which would prevent riyah. Asar tvachim is not going to prevent riyah, but it will be considered a separate area. B'mechitza gvei asar tvachim. Aval bebika, that's talking about a gina. Masha'enken bebika, bika is dealing with an area which is a place of sadis, a place of fields. Is over there, ain't tzarich lahavdil bikasim bikas kaveri. Over there, you can't insist that you want to have a separation between your field and the other person's field. Ella b'makim shenago, unless it's a place where that's the minig. But without having a specific minig that people could insist to have a mechitza, b'pashtus, it's not a place where you normally could insist to have a mechitza. So again, we have a chotzer, we have a gina, we have a bika. In a chotzer, you could insist on having a mechitza, which is gavei arba ames, in order to prevent riyah. In a gina, you could insist on having a mechitza, which is asar tvachim. And a bika, unless there's a specific minig, you can't insist on having any mechitza. Now, rotza lahavdil bikasim bikas chaveri. If lepel, you are not insisting that the other person make a mechitza, but you want a mechitza. So then it's koines l'teich shalei ubeines. So then you can't build a mechitza on his property. Your koines l'teich shalei, you build it on your own property ubeines, then you build it. In other words, on your own property you could build it. Now, but you want that people should know first of all that it's built on your property and that the mechitza itself belongs to you. In other words, you have like a type of a siman. A chazis means something to see, something like sticking out. In other words, you on this mechitza you add some sid, some cement, mibachutz, from the outside, in other words, towards the other person's area, other person's property. Kedei leidiyah, so it should be clear that would be the siman shahakoisel shalei. And lefichach, if there was this siman on this koisel, which shows that the koisel was his, im nafal hakoisel, if the koisel is going to fall down, is hamakim v'avanim shalei. So then the makim will take be his. The makim and the avanim will be his. Now v'masim midashneim. Lepel, if they both agreed, even though it's a bika, which is not really necessary, there's no chiyuv. One person can be mechayiv the other person to make a mechitza. But lepel, if they both agreed to make a mechitza, so then beinim hakesel be'emtza, so then they build the kesel not on one side, but on be'emtza, and then v'oisn chazis mikana mikana, and then you make a chazis from both sides, memela, to show that it belongs to both. And lefichach im mafal hakesel is hamakim v'avanim shel shneim. So then the place will belong to both. Halacha Yud Zayin. Hamecher gina lechaveri stam. A person sells a person part of his gina. V'hoisa mu'ureves im gines acheres, and that gina was connected to other gines. So in other words, there was a gina that was part of other gines. Is koifenes alikeach, livnes is a koisel b'neim. So part of the deal, we assume that the buyer is going to have to build the wall in between his gina and the other gines, which belongs to the original seller. Even if it's a place which the minig is shalei ligder bebinis, but lepel, you could insist that the buyer should go ahead and be goider beginis. In other words, when you go ahead and sell someone part of your gina, and that gina is attached to your gina, so that din is that person, that buyer, is responsible. You could mud from him. There's no chiyuv, but you could mud from him that he should build a kaisel between the two of you, and that kaisel should be 10 tvachim tall. And that's even in a place where the meaning is not to have ligder beginners. Aval mocher bika stam, but if a person sells stam as a bika, normally a bika there's no chiyuv. That's what we said before. A bika there's no chiyuv ligder, but a gina there's a chiyuv ligder, and here the chiddush is that even b'makom shenago shalei ligder there's also a chiyuv ligder. That's chiddush number one, and chiddush number two is that when someone sells a gina to someone else, so the expectation is that the buyer is going to go ahead and build the kaisel between his gina and the gina of the person that sold it to him. Halacha Yudches. Now the question is, how big of a wall do you have to make between the chatzeris? Now, so we said before that it has to be 4 ames tall, that's minimum, and also that it could be according to the minig, and if the minig is chutzim and kanim, that's also fine. Now there's other minhagim. That's the first Mishnah in Bava Basra. Halacha Yudches. Mokim shenago livnes ksolim hamavdilim b'chatzeris. A beginners. They do it ba'avonim sheinim gazes, and those unfinished stones that are still etching out. It was never finished out to make it straight, so therefore it's bigger. So normally the size of it would be 6 tvachim. A stone which wasn't cut out, so that would be 6 tvachim long. Is then noisen shleisha tvachim? Is then noisen shleisha tvachim? So each balachotzer, and as we're making a wall between 2 chatzeres, so each balachotzer has to give 3 tvachim of his chotzer towards the wall. Because if we're talking about the minig is to build it with stones that are already cut, so Mimela, they're not edging out, the pieces aren't edging out, so they're not so big, they're only 5 tvachim long, so then zenesen tvachim machzav, zenesen tvachim machzav. So each person, each balachotzer gives 2.5 tvachim. Chvisim is a half a levena. So a levena is a brick. So a half a levena, a brick is 3 tvachim, so a half a levena is 1.5 tvachim. Now when you build bechvisim, what would happen is that you would have 2 half a levenas, and in between you would have a tefach of cement. So when you're building bechvisim, so it would take up 4 tvachim. That was bechvisim, would take up 4 tvachim. So when you're building bechvisim, is that nesen tvachim, is that nesen tvachim. Each one gives 2 tvachim. Bilavenim, if you're building with bricks, and we said the length of a brick is 3 tvachim, is that nesen tefach umachzav, is that nesen tefach umachzav. V'chol hashiurim elu is all uvi hakesel imasid. Talking about the width of the kesel, including the plaster or the sid that's on the wall. V'heilu became hakesel mishim shneim. Since the seder advarim is that when you build a chotzer, when you have a wall between the chotzer, so both of them are mishtativ in the place of the wall. Zim nofel hakesel. If the kesel falls down, is that yamokim v'avanim shneim. We could assume the pashtos that the place where the kesel stood and the stones belong to both. Even if the stone fell into rishus of one of them, so l'chura, one of them is the muhzik, and he's tiny that it's his. Eshepina echad mem is called alvanim l'shuse, or he brought all the stones into his rishus. V'toan, and now he's tiny shemachali chaveri chelke a nasli matana, and he's tiny he's a muhzik. So then is einin naman el hareim b'rishus shel shneim at sheyaviraya. We considered the pashtus was that it belonged to both of them. And the rule is that when something belongs to both of them, so even though right now one of them has possession, he's not considered a muhzik. A muhzik means if someone has something, and let's say someone is a marakama, and then now it finds itself by someone else, so that person can tie, now I bought it. Because he was this person was Daka the Morakama, but Lepel, now he's the Muzik. But Masha'enka, when they were both Shutfim in something, we assumed that they were both Shutfim. So even though right now one of them has it, and he's claiming, and they were both Shutfim, and it was really lying also B'Rishus Shneim, and now one of them is tining that he bought it, even though it's the Lepel lying in his Rishus. So that taina is not really a taina. By Shutfim, it doesn't work such a taina. And therefore, even though one of them has it and it's lying in his Rishus, nevertheless, we say Yachlik.